Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Karl Landert. I'm the MD of the DCT unit at Cambridge Cognition, and I will be your host today on this webinar. With me, I have Ute Bertelsmann and Peter Heimer from Pratia, who will cover the aspects from a site perspective, and Paul Bodfish, who is from MRN, the home healthcare solution provider that we are using in the trials at home RADIAL concept study. So we would like to welcome you. It's really great to have you all here, and I will jump into the topics without further ado. So the agenda looks like that for today. I'll do a short overview of the trials at home initiative and the RADIAL concept study. I will then cover a RADIAL from a technology provider point of view. Paul will look at home healthcare aspects, and Ute and Peter will cover the perspectives from the side. We will then go into the Q&A, and I hope we'll have a lot of questions. If you want to ask questions, please use the question and answer feature of Zoom, which is at the bottom for most of you. And if you want to address a question to a specific person, please use the convention as stated below with an ampersand and the first name of the person. Right. So I will start with the overview of the Trials at Home Consortium and of RADIAL. So what is Trials at Home? Trials at Home is an initiative that is funded by the European Union, more specifically by the Innovative Medicines Initiative. The consortium that has been selected to do the Trials at Home initiative looks at decentralized clinical trials with a focus on Europe, the operationalization of DCTs in Europe, the benefits and the challenges. And it was started in 2019 and has a budget of roughly 40 million euros to look at all the aspects and also then publish a lot of best practices around DCTs in Europe. The consortium consists of a lot of participants from academia, from small and medium-sized enterprises, and from the Pharmaceutical Association of Europe. And you see a couple of the names here. eClinical Health, the company I'm representing, which has now been acquired by Cambridge Cognition a little bit more than a year ago, was a small and medium-sized enterprise participating in the consortium, and MRN, represented by Paul, was another of these type of consortium partners. So what is RADIAL? RADIAL is a concept study as part of the Trials at Home Consortium. It is a study which is a low interventional phase 4 study, which looks at patients with diabetes type 2 and which are treated with Toujeo, a drug from Sanofi. It evaluates the acceptability and the benefits of DCT. And really, I mean, the primary endpoints are operational metrics: recruitment, safety events, adherence, satisfaction, cost of running a DCT in Europe in this setting. And the secondary endpoints are the clinical endpoints like HbA1c or like also fasting SMPG. It is one of the first studies that really looks at DCTs and tries to collect all these operational metrics to have data which really will give us some new insights into DCTs and their acceptance and the benefits, or also the challenges. The design is in two parts. Part B, which you see at the bottom, is a fully remote study, or is one of the arms which is conducted fully remote from recruitment to actually study end. There is no visit at all at the site. Everything is handled through telehealth consultation through the platform, and where we would usually see visits or phone calls, we see reporting time points, which I will cover a little bit later. Part A is a two-arm, well, it's additional 2 arms, but it's called Part A. The recruitment, the screening, everything is done in a traditional way, and then participants are randomized into a conventional arm and into a hybrid arm. The hybrid arm here is a little bit different than the remote arm in that it also has a home health visit included to get also some insights about home health care and the challenges, the benefits, the feedbacks that we want to get out of it. There are a couple of decentralized elements that I will not cover in more details here, but you can see what the decentralized elements are that we are covering. One big area which we'll not cover at all today is the direct patient shipments of INP, but I'm sure if that's of interest to you, it's also an area that will be published and where a lot of insights have been gained. This is the current status as of today. I highlighted in yellow the German site that is the fully remote study site in Germany, represented by Jute and by Peter. Obviously, Pratia is covering much more than this site, but you see that we have recruited and fully enrolled 2 patients or 2 participants so far at the German sites. Italy is going live today or tomorrow, so we are not having all countries live, and the recruitment is taking quite some time and has some challenges, mainly because of the site activation, but also because of some of the inclusion-exclusion criteria, which are not easy to meet. What you see is also that I put an asterisk on the Part B for the UK sites. Some of these pre-screened participants were test patients that were done by the UK sites. So it's not really representative that we had so many pre-screened participants in the UK with so little conversion. The recruitment effort will really start and has been started very recently. So that's RADIAL, and that's trials at home. So let me focus a little bit on the technology and the technology that we have been providing as eClinical Health or Cambridge Cognition. What have we delivered as part of the technology platform? Well, this is quite a long list, and it is a long list indeed. But when you look at the participant-facing technology, we have 3 types of patient-facing questionnaires or diaries. We have what we call trigger questionnaires, which are based on events, which are like example events like visit completion, where you see typical questionnaires or ePro, like EQ5D, demographics questionnaires, but also satisfaction or experience questionnaires. Then we have scheduled questionnaires. They are triggered based on a date and have a window. I mean, the other ones have also a window. So you see a list of these questionnaires as well. So per participant, during the conduct of the study, we have a total of 17 assessments. Moreover, we have diaries which are on demand, like the lab diary, the daily insulin diary, which is used in screening for the remote arm before we deploy the smart pen, or is used also for the conventional arm. I'll come to the smart pen in a couple of slides. We have the glucose diary, which is automatically filled in from the glucometer measurements. We have hypo, concomitant medication adverse events diary, which we have renamed for the participants into change in medication or medical events, which are shared diaries, which I'll cover also a little bit later. So when you do all the counts, we will have more than 100 diaries per participant. We have the 17 assessments. We have reminders which are triggered, and the reminders were selected to be SMS because a lot of these assessments can be done on their phone, through the app, or on their portal. So we selected SMS as the common denominator. The tasks which are guiding the participant through the study, are triggered by the workflow. Or for part B only, we have 23 tasks with some variation for the other parts. We have 13 e-learnings. From a site perspective, besides the participant, we have 9 different roles which are listed here. We access the system. Again, we have notification and alerts, unique CRF pages, which are part of the platform, site satisfaction questionnaires by site user, not by role, the shared diaries, again, which are reflected here as well, a lot of reports, and at the bottom you see some of the integration which we have done. Why do I brought that up? Well, all of that has been done as part of the ClinPal system, which we are delivering through eClinical Health or Cambridge Cognition. This is an example of the data flow that we have for part B. Just quickly explaining it, we have obviously the RADIAL EDC or portal that is used for site, mainly for the sites, but can also be used by the participants if they want to do their training or if they want to consume some of the questionnaires through the portal. All participants have an app, which is the RADIAL app, which is again a ClinPal app, which they use for signing the informed consent with a qualified electronic signature. The app is a conduit for the glucometer, which is connected by Bluetooth with our app. It's obviously also used to enter diaries and ePros. And it launches a companion app from a company called Ardex, which then connects to a smart CAP pen, which is for the daily insulin monitoring of the injections. And it automates that through their backend and then back into the EDC system. We have a manual interface with the RTSM system. We have notification to the logistics systems, and we have manual entries of lab results and obviously transcription from source data at the site into the EDC system as you would expect it. So that's the overall system that has been deployed. What was the journey to get there? On this slide, you see the tech journey, as we call it. On the right-hand side, you see the regulatory milestones. And on the left-hand side, you see how we approach that and some of the challenges we were facing. So in October of 2020, we completed the basic building blocks architecture, which we use for our RFPs and RFI. And we as well, we were evaluated as part of an RFI of all the internal consortium members before we went to the external RFI, RFP. In April, May 21, we had finalized the selection of all the vendors. And the first attempt was to set up a vendor building block structure as part of the consortium, which was structured into architecture, platform, RTSM. The idea was that the devices would be handled differently. The telemedicine would be handled as a separate stream than the patient onboarding, and finally also the help desk. This then, resulted into a shift because we realized this was not working, and it was then shifted into what was called technology building blocks. One was about data landscape and integration, which is basically to a large extent what we showed you with the ClinPal platform. There was one about RTSM and logistics, which had very limited interfaces and interaction. And there was a patient onboarding, patient engagement stream that was created. So that was an improvement, but it was not the final breakthrough. In parallel, and it took a very, very long time, the vendor contracts were put in place. And finally, in May, we had all the vendor contracts in place. But then we decided in September to put a small cross-functional leadership team to drive progress, which consisting of our participation, the sponsors, the University Clinic of Utrecht, and the CRO, Julius Clinical. There was an audit which was conducted, and finally in October 2020, in line with the CT's Part 2 approval, we had the first version of the database specification signed off. Trials at Home, or RADIAL, was one of the first studies going through the CT's process, and it has proven to be very successful, although there were some challenges, which I go beyond what I can cover today. But let's continue on the tech journey on the left-hand side. So December 22, we then finally also got version 1 of what we call tasks and messaging. These are the patient-facing messages that you send to them, which have one element of guiding them, the other element of patient engagement, and the respective tasks they need to do. We started this year in February with the UAT and a couple of iterations. And in June 23, we finally signed off the UAT with the database specification version 3, which incorporated 236 changes versus the first signed off version in October, of which 176 were added during UAT. Not bugs, changes. The task and messages, which was a little bit later, underwent also a couple of changes. And finally, in June 2023, we went live with UK Part A. Some discussions did happen after CD's approval because of local interpretation, IMP delivery, which was mentioned before. A lot of these things took quite a long time to discuss, even after CT's 2 approval. So we know that DCTs have many parties and have complex data flows. I tried to show that at the beginning. But some configuration, I mean, what worked well? I think the consortium had a very positive spirit, and all parties involved were really highly cooperative. Having this small dedicated team at some point in time for the data landscape and integrations workstream was really needed. Having also a solution design ownership in one hand, and I must say this solution design ownership is not the typical architecture type of ownership you expect, but it's somebody driving the solution design, a scarce skill, but this was also very important. Our plug-in architecture was based on microservices, was very helpful, and also subcontracting some device integration, and for example, the e-signature solution, which we did rather than having side-by-side integrations, significantly reduced the efforts for all people. What do you need to consider? Well, first of all, you need to find the right skills and the right people with the right attitude. Not easy in DCT. The second consideration is best of breed versus good enough. I mentioned the vendor building blocks and the evaluation. Well, sometimes, in hindsight, you are much, you know much more. It could have been much simpler. We could have not selected the best of breed solution, but a very limited solution, which would have been good enough and part of the platform, which would have simplified things. As mentioned before, having a contracting model, working with one supplier or limiting the number of suppliers would help tremendously. Patient engagement, a great word, great ideas. In the end, you implement much less than you anticipated. Just given the complexity, the amount of work, the people you need to have to develop the content, the translations. So our experience is usually you start with big plans, but you end up with very limited patient engagement. Features, bring your own device, which I will cover. Testing UAT management with the multiple integration, a big challenge. How to set up the help desk, something I will cover later on. What took a long time? Requirement specification, recruitment, going back and forth about feasibility of digital recruitment, especially in the remote arm. Again, we'll be covering that. Training materials, patient engagement. The fully remote informed consent, which I will show to you, will took also quite some time. These shared diaries, which I mentioned before, testing, privacy, and data processing. Given the time, I cannot cover those in more detail, and I'd like to move on to recruitment. So initially, the idea was to recruit everything to digital campaigns. We then reverted back also for budget and feasibility challenge to have different approaches by countries. And some countries, the sites are fully in charge of running their own campaigns. In other countries, we have a central campaign, and the sites have selected, for example, also working with registries or working with HCP networks. And as you have seen, recruitment is slow. So right now, I think there is an initiative to add also our advocacy groups, to involve them. So we'll have these different approaches by country. We'll do some measurements, what worked, what didn't work. But as we all know, recruiting is a big challenge. If you want to look at the website that people will land on, and that's basically harmonized for all countries, there is a trial website which has been developed by one of the vendors, which then links to the pre-screener, which is on the ClinPal platform, and then the next steps are being followed. So recruitment, a never-ending challenge in every study that I have been working on. We'll see how things go, and I'm sure that Ute and also Peter will say a few words about their recruitment challenges they have. Bring your own device. Well, we selected bring your own device versus provision devices. One reason is cost for the devices, for the internet access plans and internet plans, but also user experience. It's much easier for a user to work with their phone. Their phone is always with you. When you go out of and you travel, or you don't forget your phone. You may forget another device. But there are also challenges, I listed them here. And benefits for provision devices also listed here. One of the biggest challenges with bring your own device, and you can go through this link, which I will go through, is as soon as you have provision devices, you may not have and support all the devices that are there. And this is basically a Roche provided website, and it says phones that are known to be difficult or impossible to pair and maintain a pair status with the Bluetooth connected glucometer. And there's a long list. Well, first of all, we cannot test all the devices. It's impossible. But we then concluded that some of these devices, if people only have this device, we don't provide them with the device, this will be an exclusion criteria. Let's move on to remote informed consent, which I mentioned before. We were the first ones, I think, to get approval in 6 European countries to do a fully remote informed consent, because we have a qualified electronic signature qualified electronic signature according to the EIDAS EU legislation, which makes it completely equivalent to a wedding signature. Very quickly, informed consent, showing you how this works. Oops, I think I need to go here, and I hope I can. So this is what we call on the left-hand side an informational informed consent. You see, you get your tasks, and then you basically have all the informed consent with the different, quizzes and so on that you can go through, and finally you request a video conference. Now, once you're finished, you visit 1A. At the end of the visit 1A, you can proceed to your signing of the informed consent. You go through you go to the selection of what to do with your data. You continue. You then identify it with your passport or your ID. If you have an NFC passport, you don't need to, do this shifting of your passport. You do a selfie. You may see that as very familiar. It happens when you cross the border sometimes at these automated gates, and then you basically sign the informed consent, and you get the informed consent document that you can look at with the electronic signature. So this is a fully validated process. What were the challenges? Some of the challenges were not CITES. The CITES approval was not an issue. But then as you move to country-related approval and RFIs, you have to make the case that this is really a qualified electronic signatures and that this is recognized. And as I said, I'm happy to say that we had approval in all the 6 countries. Now, having said that, it's not harmonized. It's a lot of effort for every single country. They have different, paper, well, start with the paper version, but they have different forms that need to be signed. Some of them have a different interpretation if we need to re-sign a GDPR form or not, even when it is covered in the informed consent text. So none of the country version is similar to another one. It's 6 informed consent by country. And obviously what we also have to consider, and what we considered, is updates during the trial. So we have cases where the informed consent had to be changed already now as part of the deployments which we did for a single country. We were also I would say, intelligent enough to have a backup solution with the print-to-sign capabilities in case of non-acceptance. But actually, we use that for backups if we don't have a valid passport, which I come to. One big discussion point was investigator oversight. I think these are a couple of slides about investigator oversight in a DCT. Actually, I mean, you can have much better oversight than if you have single, discrete visits, and also the expectation about the site being a 24/7 site and always reachable. I think that is unrealistic and doesn't need to happen. And the ways we really look at and we can manage oversight through a platform. One of these oversight elements is what we call this shared diaries. So this is a shared diary where a participant can enter. Let me see again. They can look at the medical event, and they can basically self-report what would be a adverse event or potential adverse event. And depending on what they select, I'll stop here. You send a message to the site needs to report, and within this same document, because it's shared, they review it and they validate it. And basically, this is one of the things that helps us, maintaining oversight. And let me go back here and see what I did, because I think these are a couple of very important findings that we had on how you do oversight. Okay, now I know I need to hurry. So the help desk went also through a couple of evolutions, which you see on the left-hand side. We finally settled that the site would be the first point of contact for participants, and also that we would set up a consortium-provided help desk for triaging and also for supporting CRA and sites before going out to the vendors. Some of the first support cases which we had were quite interesting. The sites who were very involved in testing with us gave some of the participants, which they know personally, access to a pre-screener which led them to this test site, and all of a sudden participant was disappearing. A nice learning. It took us some time to figure this out. Hospital firewalls blocking audio video streams. the signing server, and added confusion to that when the investigator made that successful or was successful doing that at home. Again, something that we didn't expect at that extent. Connection issues with devices. I mentioned the bring your own devices, mainly with the smart pen, less with the glucometers, and the passport not being valid, not only for participants, but also for investigators who had expired passports. So we had to find workarounds for that as well. And the coordination and triage. I really apologize that I had to hurry through that, and Paul will be the next one taking up and for me to cover home healthcare. Paul, please, over to you.
Thank you, Karl. So just a brief summary of Medical Research Network. So MRN is a home trial support organization that have been supporting in-home patient visits since 2006. They're present in over 40 countries, and so are extremely experienced at working in hybridized and community-based settings that form the basis of a lot of DCT components in trials today. So I'm going to spend 5 to 10 minutes just taking you through some of the considerations for success in a trial like RADIAL. But really, these are elements and components and issues and challenges that we would see on any DCT that involves an in-home component. So they're not just specific to RADIAL. And these are things that you would think about on any trial. Next slide, please, Karl. So as you can see from the protocol overview that Karl provided earlier, for this particular study, there is an in-home nursing visit at week 12 on the hybrid arm. So this in itself can pose some challenges really for home care organizations, because it's only a singular visit that's required throughout the protocol. From an in-home perspective, it's actually quite a simplistic visit. There's not a huge amount of activity from a clinical perspective that's required. The nurse doesn't need to bring a lot of specialist equipment. MRN themselves are used to doing in-home IMP administration, either via injections or by infusions. But for this study, there's none of that requirement. And even the capillary blood draws don't really require any processing. So again, MRN nurses would be used to doing blood spinning, etc., in the home. So they carried on of portable equipment. But as I said here, the requirements for the RADIAL protocol are relatively simple for the nurse, even to the point that we're not even using ClinPal to collect the visit data. That gets collected on paper by the nurse and then gets scanned into a dedicated share file area where the sites can then pick that up. Next slide, please, Karl. So as I said, you would have thought this is, as I've mentioned, it's a very simple visit in terms of the clinical conduct. However, setting up these types of sites to work with home care actually has a lot of challenges involved. And so I'm going to take you through some of those components. One key thing to note is that these will vary from country to country. That in itself is a challenge for putting home care into any DCT, is that we've recognized over the past 16, 17 years at MRM that we don't yet have a consistent approach. And it's only been in the last few years that we've started to get some regulatory guidance and really to support in-home activities on clinical trials. So firstly, let's talk about, sorry, please go back, Karl. Let's talk about adoption by sites. As you all know, take-up of home care visits has to be an option for sites and not mandated within the protocol. So the sites and the patients can choose whether or not to have those particular visits that are mandated as home visits themselves. They don't have to go through with that. Secondly, some of the sites may want, for all sorts of reasons, to use their own nurses rather than utilize the nurses of a specialist home care organization. And they might do that because of familiarity, of control and oversight, and a comfort factor of working with the same individuals that they're used to working with on a day-by-day basis. We then need to look at PI oversight. This was something that BfArM we discussed at the RADIAL study with BfArM at length, because they were keen to understand how does oversight work when an individual is never going to probably meet the PI or the study team, is an individual that, whilst clinically trained, again, doesn't form part of their standard setup. So given that they're so far removed from the in-house activities that would normally take place at a site, how does the PI keep control of what they're doing and oversight through through those home visits? Probably the most complex area for MRN actually is around how we contract with sites and ensure that data protection rules such as GDPR are enforced and complied with. And that can be quite a challenge, given again that whilst GDPR is uniformly applied across the European Union, the way that it actually works in practice at the country level, as Karl alluded to, can be quite different. And then finally, we have to deal with sample logistics. And whilst, again, that's quite simple for RADIAL, there are some challenges associated with that. Next slide, please, Karl. So how do we ensure that we get the right level of adoption of the home healthcare visits by the RADIAL sites that are taking part in the hybrid arm? So it's really about education and understanding. A lot of these sites may not have worked with organizations like MRM before. So having early engagement and having a specific SIV with the sites to go through the process, help them understand the benefits and talk about some of the topics that will be close to their hearts is absolutely key to that success. Some of the key topics that sites traditionally have wanted to know more about is how do we identify and train the nurses? How is that documented? How do they get to sign off the nurses? How do they get on the delegation of activity log, etc.? And then we also need to be prepared as an organization to help them understand what the regulatory landscape looks like for home care in that country. And again, that's a challenge in itself. There are some countries where the regulations at a healthcare level around what nurses can and can't do in the home is very clear. In most countries, however, it is not. Unfortunately for MRN, the challenge is making sure that the sites understand that just because there is no legal position, that doesn't mean, therefore, that we cannot go ahead and provide that as a service. So understanding also how the communication of the nurse and the site will work throughout the visits and after the visits and before the visits is also key. What happens if the nurse identifies a serious adverse event, etc., etc. So making sure that those pathways of communication and escalation are set up and clear to both parties. Next slide, please, Karl. We've talked about oversight and the fact that BfArM in particular were interested for RADIAL, how this was achieved. Well, the answer is that whilst MRN have their own standard process that they can work with the site and get that form signed by the PI, the reality for MRN is that a lot of sites will want to do this very differently. And this is something that certainly we would want to see as a recommendation coming out of RADIAL, is how do we harmonize this approach across all countries? Not an easy thing to do. The challenge for us is that the guidance clearly provided by the EMA in the last few years is that there has to be some form of documentation or contract in place between a home care provider and the site. MRN, as I say, achieved that by using a PI home trial support oversight form, but some sites won't accept that. Some sites want to use their own contracts. Within that framework, we also need to include how we're going to deal with personal information and personal data, because the patient's name and address and contact details will be shared with the home care provider and the nurse. Some sites will have concerns about liability and indemnification, so they don't, rightly so, want to be liable for the actions of a nurse that is not employed by them. So MRN can take a flexible approach, and we'll work with the sites on what that approach should be. But the bottom line is we have to make sure that whatever that approach is, it complies with the regulation and clearly demonstrates how the PI will maintain oversight of the nurse activities. Next slide, please, Karl. And lastly, we'll talk about logistics. I'll rush through this quickly so that Ute can get on. But again, this is a simple process for MRM, but that doesn't mean to say that there aren't challenges. Again, early communication and understanding of requirements is paramount. So what do the lab kits look like? are there transport constraints? So what I mean by that is, does any blood that's taken need to be kept in certain conditions, such as at the 2 to 8 temperature, or can it be ambient? Does it need to be frozen, etc.? So understanding what's actually required up front, it helps us immensely. Who's actually providing the logistics? How are the packages getting to the nurse? Does that come in from another country? Where is the central lab located? How does the sample get to the central lab? So all of these have been clearly identified and processed out for RADIAL, but making sure that all of the partners and vendors that are involved in that workflow can actually follow that process is key. You know, so here we're using the nurses, once they've taken the sample, they're packaging it up here as the graphics demonstrate. They go on to the UPS website, where they then find out where their nearest drop-off point is, and that then goes to the central lab at Serber. There's lots of different variations of that. You can have more control by bringing more expensive couriers right in to meet with the nurse at a patient's home. But for RADIAL, this was a simple, more cost-effective solution. I'll leave that there and hand over to Ute, but if there are any questions around the home care components, I'm happy to take those at the end.
Thank you, Paul, and over to you, Ute.
Okay, so I quickly introduce myself and our PI, Peter Heimer. So hi, Peter. My name is Ute. I'm the Managing Director of Pratia Germany, and we present, the practical part of the game. So Peter is with me because he's conducting the trial at our site in Dresden, and Dresden is this fully, this trial which is running this fully remote trial. Okay, so next slide, just a quick intro. Next slide, we are Pratia Germany. So Pratia Germany is a network of 6 dedicated study sites in Germany. We can do everything which can be done in an outpatient setting, mostly phase 3 for phase 2 and 3. We are more than 80 people, well trained, and have 28 years of experience. And we are part, next slide, of a European site network. So our 6 sites in Germany have brothers and sisters in many European countries. And here you see that Pratia is driving different site models. So our outpatient setting in Poland, we have a phase 1 and also oncology units. So all the countries are a little bit different. And there are 3 countries taking part in the RADIAL trial. It's Spain, Poland, and Germany, but Germany is the site who's currently enrolling. The others are in the startup phase, as far as I have last thing. Okay, so when it comes to the RADIAL trial, next slide, please. It is in our site in Dresden. Here you see our site. It is a head of site, Lars. And next, so we are in the main street of Dresden, and maybe next slide, Peter is a PI here, next slide. And here you see that inside there we have a waiting room, but for RADIAL, this waiting room remains empty because none of the 35 patients we intend to enroll will ever see the site or visiting the site. So they only see Peter in the online online visit and our study stuff. And here you have the press release. The first patient which was enrolled fully remote in RADIAL was enrolled by Peter. And now we come to the, let's say, key success factors of this trial. But first, maybe Peter, how does it felt like to enroll the first patient worldwide?
It was a great success. It was good. It was some little difficulties in the beginning, but it felt good.
Okay, and in the end, it all went well. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so the feedback on what are the key success factors here. You see me as a patient because it was the original screenshot of Peter, and we replaced the face of the patient for well-known reasons. Okay, so we now highlight 3 practical aspects. One is the telemedicine system. A good system is key, and when we think of a system, then we think that audio and video has to be in a very good shape and quality. Then part of this problem or solution are the telemedicine system itself and the quality of the Wi-Fi, even in the patient's home. So it gets more and more complicated when it comes to physical examinations. So the limitation is when it is necessary to touch the patient or to have an impression of the smell or something else, then a remote visit is not recommended or planned. And Peter highlighted that the opportunity to upload and exchange documents is very valuable. But Peter, you told me that there is, in the end, if you don't have to touch the patient or do some physical examination, there is no difference between telemedicine visit and a real visit. Is it correctly understood?
It's completely correct. For this study, we don't need these features for touching the patient, but the possibility to upload and exchange documents, like Ute said, that would be an opportunity, would make it a lot more easier to conduct the visits. So we do it in a little bit old-fashioned way. The patient tells me his or her medications, and then I write it down. Maybe it could be a more easier way.
Okay, so these are things I think that also Karl will feedback this to the RADIAL team. And it is in fact something what we wanted to find out or want to find out in this project, which are the missing links. Okay, so next slide, please. Very important is for us as a study site, the shipping issue. So our experience is choose the supplier carefully. So in case of RADIAL, the patient had to send some sample, and this sample, it was one of the suppliers here, but this supplier was not so available, so broadly available, so that for the patient it took more stations he drove to just to drop his sample, because it was not the right station available. This trial, a remote trial, is running also at the countryside, and whatever you consider, please consider the real-time the real world, instead of maybe your neighborhood with a Späti next door everywhere where you can drop a parcel. Okay, and also the coordination of the shipments. There you always have to consider that this also takes time. So if the site has to do it in terms of availability of the patient, then we have to somehow charge it, invoice it, or it is otherwise solved. So this is the effort for the patient, and this is the third slide now. Next one, feedback on recruitment. We received in the RADIAL trial in terms of the patient who has to go to the site, that's a lot of effort, and the one who stays at home, that's nothing. But it is not nothing, because the patient's time and effort is also there if you drop a shipment or if you take the time for the visit. So there is efforts, and we should reimburse the patient for this, for his contribution. It is standard in Germany, and in the case of RADIAL, it is somehow weird that the remote arm is understood as there is no efforts for the patient, and the other arms there is some effort. And we think that it is also not good for the results you finally compare. And when you explain it to the patient, please always consider we are in the world of clinical research. We understand abbreviations like a last patient first visit or whatever. So, but the patient, also the word remote or hybrid is somehow complicated for them. So the special challenge in RADIAL is it can happen in every trial. So the exact combination of the medication is more rare than we expected. So we need a broad funnel of patients. And so this is what it is somehow challenging for recruitment. And maybe last slide now. It's just the central contract. Pratia has a central contact, so you can always get in touch with me, or then I make the connection to the site in Dresden. But we also have a central contract for European inquiry, and that's my last slide. And I say, Peter, you like to add something, or?
No, you
No.
said everything. For the moment, nothing to add.
But I think in questions and answers, it's your turn. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, thank you, Ute. Thank you, Paul and Peter. And I think just to add to a couple of things which I've forgotten to say. Obviously, there are some. At the first consultation, we expect the patient to do some blood pressure monitor measurements. So we ship blood pressure monitors to the patient. They have to measure their height and weight. So there are some things that they do remotely at home, but yeah, as you mentioned, you cannot smell them and you cannot touch them. That's where things cannot happen. But there are a few of these remote activities that they need to do themselves. Also, mentioning what you said, there is some effort on their side. And I must say, to our, detriment or whatever, we had a lot of new requirements coming in at last minute, but somebody missed this requirement of being able to upload documents and share documents, which actually would have been an easy thing to do, but we somehow missed it in the overall specification. So thank you for that feedback. We'll take it on board, and maybe we'll do a last change to the system in one of the mid-study releases we will do. Yeah, we'll move to question and answers, and I will have to quickly stop sharing. I think there is just one before we move to question and answer. There's a lot of information you can have on the web. Here are some links which you have also to trials at home. But to really look at the question and answers, I just need to look at no questions right now from nobody, no answers. Obviously, I don't see any questions. We had a couple of questions which came in early during the registration. And this is really to you, Peter, and to you. Please comment on how the sites responded and what was done to integrate into their workflows to ensure buy-in. I mean, maybe you can share a little bit the approach that the consortium took to get you onboarded. Right?
What is the meaning of buy-in? So that we were contracted as site, or?
Well, I think they'll buy into the procedures that you support. Again, I think it's maybe not a typical question for you, but I mean, maybe you can say something about the amount of training that was given.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
The time that the CRO, Jewish Clinical, the sponsor took to really onboard you and
okay, so the startup. Maybe Peter, you say something, because I think it was sometimes challenging.
Yeah, we are involved in the startup process for now 2 years, and it was somehow difficult to start a study in Germany because of some regulatory issues with shipping the medication to the patient. That costs a lot of time and communication between legal authorities and us. And the second was our training. That was not other to other studies. That are some training for the procedures for us, for the studies side stuff, and that was okay. There was no special and not a bigger amount of time than in other studies. I don't know if that was the question.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much. So there was another question. What about consenting patients remotely who are unable to manage electronic consent? Example, the elderly or disabled. Well, I mean, in RADIAL right now, I mean, the answer is pretty simple. We already, have for the remote patients, there is the requirements they need to be able to use an app, and if not, they will be excluded. I think in other studies, and this is not really targeted at informed consent, we have sent them to fill in questionnaires and so on, support, especially, you know, when you have scarce or you're challenged to have enough patients, you need a certain stratification or diversity. We have gone all the way to really go to the patient's home or support them on the phone and so on. But I think there are ways of supporting populations which have challenges with information technology. But yeah, I mean, it is a very valid question and cannot always be resolved completely. I still see no questions so far. So the last questions before maybe Paul or anybody else has a last comment, but the one I'd like to answer is, what's next for the RADIAL study? Well, what's next is addressing the recruitment challenge. We heard that it is not easy. The protocol requires a certain inclusion-exclusion criteria, which is not easy to meet. Coupled with the novel approaches, I think the challenge, and the jury is still out, how can we recruit enough participants within the timeframes that we want to get also the power for the study and the insights? That's the biggest challenge, I would say, at this point in time and at this moment. Before I close, I don't know, Ute, Paul, Peter, any last thoughts or any last remarks which you'd like to make?
No, I think that I would just add, Karl, to what you were saying about the recruitment. That's clearly our main focus now, is to get the recruitment up and running and where we want it. But I think there has to be a recognition that whilst the challenges that we see on RADIAL are not just unique to us, they will be prevalent on other DCTs. I think the recommendations that will come out of RADIAL and out of the whole Trials at Home initiative will support a more efficient and more effective use of DCT methodology in the future. What we have to do is translate the results that we get out into something more meaningful, where we take away some of the issues and challenges that we have of this type of consortium versus a typical pharma-led sponsored clinical trial, which most of DCTs will be moving forward. And so we expect those recommendations to be very full and very helpful to the industry moving forward.
Thank you very much, Paul. Ute, Peter, any last?
So maybe from our side, that we see it positive, and that we see positives that we can be part of this trial, that maybe in case of RADIAL, it's so many stakeholders, so maybe a small project team could be or is normally maybe more efficient in terms of timeline. So when I think the startup took now 2 years and everything was new, the CITES was new, so this should not make fear, but I think it's absolutely doable once you do it, and we want to encourage to reach out and to try DCT elements in trials, because it can really lower the burden for specific target groups, also for vulnerable target groups.
Good.
Can make a little comment to our 2 patients. They are very happy until now. Glucose values are developed very good, and the feedback from both is positive. Like I say, they are very happy.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
contributing to this webinar. Thank you for listening to us. We'll follow up with all the registrants, and obviously we can make available the recording the people who have signed up for the webinar. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good continuation of your day or a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.